was from this front porch that James A. Garfield would talk to the people. Over 15,000 people who came to see him as he ran for the presidency in 1880. Join me today on Walk with History from Mentor, Ohio, as we talk about the 20th President of the United States, James A. Garfield. So James Garfield, when he ran for president, he was the dark horse. People didn't think he was going to be the candidate, but both sides, they really had disdain for who their candidates were, so everyone dug in their heels, and then someone pushed James Garfield forward. He'd been a congressman for a while, he's a great speaker, he was a general in the Union Army during the Civil War, and so Garfield, both sides could agree on. So when he started to run for president, this was his summer home in Mentor, Ohio. Right down this road was a train. And people would get off the train and walk down this path to his home, grabbing fruit from fruit trees that were around here, peaches and apples, and eat the fruit as they walked up to his porch to see who is this guy that's running for president. Nobody has ever directly campaigned for president before. In the 1870s, 1880s, if you directly campaigned for president, people would not vote for you.
Didn't vote on that, did we, hon?
You had people, your party went out and did it for you. You had people who spoke for you.
Hey, vote for Jake!
Nobody directly campaigned, but this all changes with James Garfield. People walk up this path, heard this person's running for president. Who is he? What does he even look like? What does he sound like? We want to see him. And so they walk up this path until James Garfield will come out on his front porch and greet everybody and give some kind of talk. And he'll talk about his point of view about the economy, his point of view about race, because he wants to start bridging the gap between the races. And he'll give his ideas about the government and things like that. And he will stand out on this front porch and talk to whatever crowds are here. And in the time span of that summer before the election, 17,000 people made this trek down here from the train to James Garfield's home. So this is the home today. Now this addition has been put on by Mrs. Garfield after James Garfield was assassinated. She had the forethought to save all of his papers, take all of his books out of the White House and save them. This is the original home. And if James Garfield was here today, he wouldn't recognize this color. It was white when James Garfield was president. So this was a white home, and this is the front porch. So from July to November of 1880, he staged his presidential campaign from here. This is where the Front Porch Campaign becomes an idea. It's a new approach for presidential candidates to get involved with their constituents personally. So Ulysses S. Grant comes out here, you get bands coming out here. Lucretia Garfield would entertain some guests in the front parlor. She would give them a standing refreshment, which is just a glass of lemonade and no chair, so they wouldn't sit down, and send them on their way. So this is the front porch. This is the family room behind these windows here. And this is where James Garfield would come out the door and speak to the people to become the 20th President of the United States. After the president is assassinated on July 2nd, 1881, he is shot at the train station in Washington, D.C. He lingers, and then he ends up dying in September of 1881. Lucretia comes back here, paints the house gray, and builds on the Presidential Library. This is considered the first presidential library.
Do you know that? No.
She builds this on because she feels like his papers are important. People will want to know what the president was thinking and feeling and writing about, his diaries. And now they're all in the Library of Congress, but at the time she had them all here. This is where the National Park Service has taken this over as a museum, as a living museum. This is all addition. James A. Garfield would not have seen this, but this part is not. So he ran his campaign from this building here. This is what he would use as his campaign office And in 1880, if you were a reporter or a person who wanted to interview the president or talk to the president, this is where you would come to speak with him, to speak one-on-one, and this is like a personal library, so we'll go in and take a look. So he had a telegraph machine here to get information out as quickly as possible. In 1880, that's the quickest way to get information out. You see there's spittoons on the floor. So again, of the time. There's a picture on the library shelf. He was a general in the Union Army, so that's him and some of his fellow soldiers. Desk, books, places you could sit and write, look things up. Of course, a stove to keep everybody warm. And then a couch to kind of relax. Some newspaper clippings up on the wall over there. And then more books. And there's a bust of Abraham Lincoln up in the corner. He was a personal hero to James A. Garfield, not only because of the Civil War, but as president, as self-taught president. James A. Garfield was an avid reader. Another reason why his presidential library is so important, because all the books that he read and things that he would write into the notes, notes that he would write into the sides of the books for his family and friends and kids to kind of read later on in life. But this is where the campaign was run out of for the 20th president. There's a back shed from the house that he just turned into an office. So the visitor center here at the James A. Garfield house is in the old carriage house where the horses would be and things like that. This is where they have a lot of artifacts for James Garfield. So the James A. Garfield actual house you can't film in. So I took pictures in there. They don't want the flash photography either because they don't want to hurt any of the artifacts. That house is filled with actual furniture and furnishings from the Garfield family. And it's set up in ways so you can see what it would look like when they lived there when James A. Garfield was alive, especially on the side of the house that's all original. The visitor center has artifacts from his life and tells you the story of his young life through his presidency, through his assassination. So this is a recreation of his inauguration. He's inaugurated, this is the Bible that is used for the inauguration. So he's inaugurated March 4th, 1881 in Washington, D.C. This is the official portrait of Garfield. This is what's used on the quarter. This talks about his college life, and when he meets Lucretia in college, a college girl, college educated. And then this will go into family life. This is great. This is Lucretia's bonnet. He has 7 children in all, but 5 will survive. The oldest dies and the youngest dies. The oldest is a girl and the youngest is a boy. And they die from whooping cough and diphtheria, which now vaccines. These are some of the things from the Civil War, including a revolver and his sword. And this is his first daughter that dies. She's 3 years old, Eliza. This is what the house looked like. See, it's white, and see the front porch, and he's standing on the front porch. This is in 1776. This is from the inauguration. This is his inaugural address. This is his speech, and that's a program. March 4th, 1881. His mother was there. First mother to be at a president's inauguration.
I love my mama very much. Now you know that.
Those are Garfield's boots and his hat, Lucretia's bonnet, some other artifacts, Lucretia's gloves, General Garfield. I think this is one of the coolest things. This is the hat he was wearing when he was shot in the railway station in D.C. This is from July 2nd, 1881, and this is the hat he was wearing that morning. This is the bed that he dies on. It's interesting that Alexander Graham Bell built a magnet system to find the bullet. So he was shot twice. One bullet was removed, one was still inside of him. And they were trying to find the bullet to remove it. And that's what kills him, is the doctors keep sticking things into the bullet path. and he gets blood poisoning and he dies. But Alexander Graham Bell develops kind of like a magnet system to find the bullet, but because he's laying on metal, it gives false positives and they can't find it. These are things from the funeral parade, including Lucretia's hat and the train time. It goes right through Erie, Pennsylvania, Girard. All these things in commemoration made to remember the president's life and mourn him. Another neat thing over here is his death mask. And then Queen Victoria will write Lucretia a letter. Queen Victoria also loses her husband, young Albert, and so she kind of understands, and she writes Lucretia a letter. And then she also gives that wreath that I took a picture of that was in the vault that is laid on Garfield's coffin. So this is the letter that she writes Lucretia. This is Garfield's field desk from the Civil War. So when he was out fighting the Civil War and he would write letters and papers and documents, this is the desk that came with him during the Civil War. He's shot in the train station on July 2nd. And the train station is no longer there. It is now a street, and the National Gallery is right there.
James Garfield, the 20th President of the United States, was assassinated here in what used to be the train station in 1881. The actual location is on the other side of this building, on the road, but this is all the President Garfield gets as far as remembrance of his assassination. He gets these two signs on the mall, not even on the main pathway. This is off on the sidewalk side, and it's not even the exact location. The exact location is on the other side of the National Gallery, Art Gallery, on the road.
So I'm at the James Garfield house, and we have just finished up our 100th or centennial 19th Amendment Girl Scout patch. It took 10 hours of work, and these scouts and their scout leader all did this work, and it's pretty awesome. It was 5 hours of educational learning and then 5 hours of actual practical learning. So they did a bike route for the women's suffrage movement here in Mentor, Ohio. They wrote letters to the women connected to James A. Garfield. And we just did a tour of the house. So it was really awesome. Bright, young people that are going to change the world, and I'm really proud of all of them. So walk with history. Here are people actually walking the walk. So thank you. When I think about Garfield, I think about he just didn't have the time. He didn't have the time to prove himself. He's barely in office for 5 months before he's shot, and then he lingers and dies about a couple months after that. So he didn't have the time to really prove himself, to change much. He changes some important things. You can't really use your influence to give jobs to people, to think if you got elected as certain officials in certain places that now you have the right to give big jobs to your friends and your family. He stopped those sort of things. Even though some of it still kind of happens today, he stopped it being deserved and perceived and official. But I feel like if he would have had more time, maybe he would have made more of a difference as the president. After he dies, Chester Arthur will become president. And this Lucretia will come back here with her children and raise her children here. And it will become a National Park Service in the 1940s. We'll take it over as a museum. So if you ever get a chance to get to Mentor, Ohio and see the first presidential library, to see the front porch, it's definitely worth the view. On to my next Walk with History.